O sat in the waiting room, nervously pacing as he awaited news from the doctor. The labor had gone on for hours, and his mind was a whirlwind of worry and excitement. His beloved wife, N, was bringing their children into the world, and they had dreamed of this day for so long. A girl, he thought, they had wanted a girl to complete their small, happy world. But as the hours stretched, his excitement faded into a gnawing anxiety. Finally, the door opened, and the doctor stepped out with a somber look on his face. O rushed toward him, eager for the news of his wife and child. "Congratulations," the doctor said, but his voice lacked the joy O expected. "You have a healthy baby girl, but—" He paused, as if weighing the weight of the next words. "Your wife, she didn't make it." O felt his heart stop. "What? No, doctor, no. Please, my wife. I'm sorry. We did everything we could," the doctor said softly. "There's something else. You had twins. A second baby, another girl." O didn't even register the news of the second child. His entire world collapsed in that moment. He fell to the ground, his hands shaking, his mind unable to process the idea that his wife, the love of his life, was gone. Grief consumed him like a fire, and in that fire, something dark took hold. When the nurses brought the twins to him, he looked at them both. One, the firstborn, was the perfect picture of health, pink and full of life. The second baby, smaller and quieter, seemed frail in comparison. "Oh, he thought, gazing at the first baby, the one they had dreamed of. But when his eyes fell on the second, all he could see was loss. He could not name her. He could not bring himself to look at her for more than a moment before something inside him hardened. In his mind, this child had stolen his wife. The joy of parenthood was soured, and O's heart, already broken by grief, found something new to hold on to: hatred. He handed both babies to the nurse, but the look he gave the second child was one of cold indifference. "Take them," he muttered. His soul was hollow, a cavern where his love once lived. From that day, O couldn't bring himself to bond with Ain, the second-born twin. Every time he looked at her, the reminder of his wife's death surged back like a tidal wave. And so, from her very first breath, Ain was pushed to the background, while Oai was bathed in affection. As the twins grew older, the difference in how they were treated became more pronounced. Oai was the apple of her father's eye. Her every need was met with care and affection. She wore the finest clothes he could afford, attended the best schools, and had every toy a child could dream of. O showered her with love, often holding her close and whispering to her that she was his world. Ain, on the other hand, was treated like an afterthought. She received the hand-me-downs of Oai, the clothes too small or too worn for her sister. If she ever asked for anything, it was met with coldness or silence. O barely acknowledged her existence, and when he did, it was with a look of disdain. She was always the one doing chores, cleaning up after her sister, and being told to stay out of the way. Even when Ain excelled in school, her father didn't care. Her accomplishments went unnoticed, and there was no praise for the bright, hard-working girl who desperately sought his approval. At school, Oai struggled with her studies, often failing to keep up with her classmates. But it didn't matter. O made sure she passed every year, paying off teachers and pulling strings to ensure she never faced consequences for her lack of effort. Meanwhile, Ain, who excelled in every subject, was told she didn't need to bother aiming high. "You'll never be anything important," her father once said when she brought home top marks. "Oi's the one who will make us proud." When it came time for university, O spared no expense to get Oai accepted into a prestigious institution. He bribed officials and ensured that she would have every opportunity to succeed, despite her mediocre academic performance. Oai was given the chance to follow her dreams, whatever they might be, with her father's full support behind her. But when Ain expressed her desire to go to university, to continue her education and build a future for herself, she was met with harsh resistance. O flatly refused to even consider it. "You," he scoffed. "You're not worth the money. I didn't raise you to be anything but a burden. Stay home and help around the house. That's all you're good for." The words cut deeply, and though Ain had long stopped expecting love from her father, the rejection of her future plans stung more than she could have imagined. She had always known she was the less favored child, but to hear her father say it outright, to dismiss her ambitions so easily, left her heart heavy with sorrow. And so, Ain remained trapped in her father's house, watching her sister go off to university with all the privileges and opportunities she would never have. Oai lived the life Ain had always dreamed of, while Ain stayed behind, her days spent in silence, her nights filled with dreams of escape. She could feel the walls closing in around her. Every passing day was a reminder that she was not wanted, not valued, and certainly not loved. The love and affection that flowed so freely toward Oai was something Ain had never known, and it seemed like she never would. Years passed, and the weight of neglect and mistreatment began to take its toll on Ain. The constant rejection, the years of being told she was nothing, had built up inside her like a pressure cooker. She spent her days working endlessly in the house, doing the chores that Oai never lifted a finger to help with, all while their father turned a blind eye. Every time she saw him shower Oai with affection, it cut her deeper. Yet she endured, because she had no choice. But one day, after a particularly cruel encounter, Ain reached her breaking point. O had humiliated her in front of their neighbors, scolding her for something she hadn't done while praising Oai, who stood by smugly, enjoying her father's protection. The humiliation left Ain feeling hollow, like the little strength she had left had been drained. That night, as she lay awake in her small room, the realization hit her: she couldn't live like this anymore. For too long, she had been a prisoner in her own home, bound by the chains of her father's hatred and her sister's cruelty. There was no future for her here. If she stayed, she would wither away, buried under the weight of their contempt. She had to leave, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. The next morning, without telling anyone, Ain packed what little belongings she had and left. She had no plan, no destination, only a fierce determination to break free. Her heart raced as she walked through the streets, not knowing where her feet would take her but knowing that anywhere was better than the life she had left behind. As fate would have it, she crossed paths with Eme, a man known for his kindness and generosity. He saw the pain in Ain's eyes, the weariness of someone who had been carrying too much for too long. Without hesitation, he offered her a place to stay, insisting she needed rest, food, and care. Though Ain was hesitant at first, the warmth in Eme's voice reassured her. For the first time in her life, someone cared, not out of obligation, but out of genuine compassion. In the days that followed, Ain found herself slowly letting down her guard. Eme and his sisters treated her with a kindness she had never known. They didn't ask questions about her past or judge her for the scars she carried. Instead, they welcomed her into their home, offering her comfort, respect, and, most importantly, hope. For the first time in her life, Ain felt like she belonged somewhere. She was no longer a shadow in the background or a burden to be dismissed. She was seen, she was heard, and she was valued. In their company, she began to heal, both physically and emotionally. The constant fear and anxiety that had plagued her for so long started to fade, replaced by a growing sense of peace. But the most important transformation was happening inside her. For years, Ain had believed the lies her father had fed her, that she was worthless, unwanted, and unloved. But in this new environment, she realized those things weren't true. She was capable, intelligent, and worthy of love. Slowly, she began to rebuild herself, finding strength she didn't know she had. Though her heart still carried the scars of her past, Ain knew she was no longer the helpless girl who had been abandoned by her father. She was something more now, someone stronger, someone who had found her worth despite everything. And as she looked ahead to her future, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with courage. She was free. Ain's new life with Eme and his sisters opened doors she had never imagined. With their support, she was finally able to pursue the dreams she had been forced to bury for so long. Eme, seeing her potential, encouraged her to apply to university, offering to cover her expenses. For the first time in her life, Ain felt like she had a future, and she grabbed the opportunity with both hands. She studied diligently, her natural intelligence and work ethic shining through. While others around her might have taken their education for granted, Ain saw it as her path to freedom. She wasn't just learning for herself, but for the version of her that had been told she would never amount to anything. Every lecture, every exam, was a step closer to reclaiming the life she had always dreamed of. Ema and his sisters continued to provide her with the support and love that she had longed for her entire life. They became the family she never had. They didn't just care for her well-being, they nurtured her soul. Ema's sisters, who had also faced challenges of their own, related to Ain in ways that made her feel understood, not pitied. They saw her strength, not her scars, and they celebrated every small victory she achieved. In this environment, Ain thrived. She graduated with honors, a moment that felt like the ultimate vindication. As she stood on stage in her graduation gown, she felt a deep sense of pride. The girl who had been dismissed, ignored, and mistreated had now proven herself to the world, but more importantly, to herself. The weight of her past no longer had power over her. After graduation, Ain entered the world of business consulting, a field she had long been passionate about. Her sharp mind and ability to solve problems quickly gained her a reputation as one of the brightest in the industry. Companies sought her expertise, and within a few short years, Ain had built a thriving career. She wasn't just successful, she was respected, admired, and for the first time in her life, truly happy. With financial independence came a new sense of freedom. She could now make choices that were entirely her own. Ain didn't just build a career, she built a life. She traveled, explored new places, and met new people who enriched her journey. She made her own choices about where to live, what to do, and how to spend her time. Every decision she made was hers, unburdened by the shadows of her past. Throughout this time, her bond with Ema deepened. He had always been there for her, a steady presence of kindness and support. But now, she saw him in a new light. Ema had fallen in love with Ain long before she realized her own feelings for him. Their connection was built on mutual respect and shared experiences, and slowly, Ain allowed herself to open up to the possibility of love. When Ema finally expressed his feelings, Ain hesitated. The wounds from her past still haunted her, and she feared that her worth was still tied to the image of the unwanted girl her father had created. But Ema reassured her, making it clear that he loved her for who she was, her intelligence, her strength, her resilience. He saw her as a partner, not someone to be saved. In time, Ain let go of her fears. She embraced the love Ema offered, recognizing that she was deserving of happiness, of a life filled with joy. They built a life together, one based on mutual respect, equality, and love. Ain was no longer defined by her past. She was no longer the neglected twin or the unwanted daughter. She had become her own person, and in doing so, she had found everything she had once believed was out of her reach. Ain's transformation wasn't just about success or love, it was about reclaiming her sense of self. She had gone from being a victim of her father's cruelty to someone who controlled her own destiny. Every step of her journey had brought her closer to the life she had always deserved, and now, as she stood at the peak of her success, she knew that she had earned every bit of it. She had won, not against her father or her past, but against the doubts that had once plagued her. She was free. Years later, when Ain had fully established herself, her past came crashing back into her life. It happened on a day that felt no different from any other, except for the unexpected visitors who showed up at her door, her father and Oae. She hadn't seen them in years, not since the day she had left their home without looking back. The sight of them was jarring. They looked worn, tired, and far from the image of the proud family they once were. Ain stared at them, her heart conflicted. Part of her wanted to shut the door in their faces and never hear from them again, but something held her back. She could see the desperation in their eyes, the way they clutched at their last shred of dignity as they stood before her, waiting for a response. O spoke first, his voice weak and unfamiliar. "Ain, we need your help," he said, the words sounding foreign to someone who had never asked for anything from her before. He had always been the one in control, the one who dictated who was worthy of help and who was not. But now, life had humbled him, and he stood before his daughter as a man stripped of his pride. Ain didn't speak. She didn't know what to say. She had imagined this moment many times over the years, wondering what she would do if they ever came back into her life. But now that it was happening, she found herself unprepared. Oai, who had always been so confident and smug in her father's favor, now looked broken. Her once lavish life had crumbled. Her husband had died in a tragic accident, and the financial stability she had always taken for granted was gone. She was penniless, forced to return to the father who had spoiled her, and now they were both begging for Ain's help. "We've lost everything," Oai whispered, her voice shaky. "Papa can't work anymore and I don't know what to do. Please, Ain, we need you." Ain felt the weight of their words pressing down on her. They were asking her for help, the same people who had never offered her anything but cruelty and neglect. They were standing in front of her now, vulnerable and in need, and the decision fell on her shoulders. For a long moment, Ain remained silent, her mind racing with thoughts. She could feel the anger from years of mistreatment bubbling up inside her, the memories of every insult, every rejection, every time she had been made to feel worthless. It would be so easy to turn them away, to let them feel the pain of abandonment she had lived with for so long. But then she remembered who she had become. She wasn't that helpless girl anymore. She had built a life for herself that was filled with love, success, and respect. She had risen above their cruelty, and she wasn't going to let their presence pull her back into that darkness. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice steady. "You only came to me because you have nowhere else to go," she said, her words measured. "If things were still good for you, you wouldn't be standing here. You never cared about me before, and now you're asking for my help because you have no one else." O lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. Oai's eyes filled with tears, but Ain felt no satisfaction in seeing them broken. Instead, there was only a deep sadness, a sadness for the family they could have been, for the love she had never received. "I'll help you," Ain said finally, her voice soft but firm. "But not because I owe you anything. I'll help because I don't want to carry this anger with me anymore. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for myself." She took out a checkbook and wrote an amount that would allow them to rebuild their lives. It was more than they deserved, but Ain knew that holding on to bitterness would only poison the peace she had worked so hard to achieve. As she handed the check to her father, she added, "This is the last time you'll hear from me. You've made your choices, and I've made mine. I've built a life without you, and I plan to continue living it that way." Her father and sister looked at her, realizing that while they had come for help, what they were leaving with was the final severing of any ties. They had lost her long ago, and now, even with her help, they would never be a part of her life again. Ain watched as they left, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over her. The weight of the past, the years of pain and resentment, had been lifted. She had chosen her path, and it was one of freedom, not revenge. In that moment, Ain knew she had finally closed the chapter on the life she had once endured. She had given them what they came for, but she had kept what mattered most, her peace, her dignity, and her future. Ain stood at the window, watching as her father and sister walked away from her life for the last time. As they disappeared from view, she felt an unexpected wave of calm wash over her. The encounter that she had dreaded for so long was over, and with it, the last vestiges of the pain they had caused her seemed to drift away. She turned back to the warmth of her home, where Yeme was waiting for her. His presence had always been a source of strength, and today was no different. He didn't say anything, he didn't need to. He simply wrapped his arms around her, and for the first time in what felt like years, Ain allowed herself to breathe deeply, fully embracing the life she had built. The years of hurt, neglect, and rejection had shaped her, but they no longer defined her. She had risen above them, creating a life filled with meaning, love, and purpose. The little girl who had once longed for her father's approval was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned to love herself, to value herself, and to create a future that no longer hinged on the validation of others. Days passed, and Ain went on with her life, but something inside her had shifted. It wasn't just that she had let go of her father and sister. It was the realization that her past no longer held any power over her. She had faced it, confronted it, and in doing so, she had taken control of her own story. It wasn't about vengeance, or making them pay for what they had done. It was about her own freedom. Time moved forward, and so did Ain. Her business flourished even more than before. With every new success, she reminded herself that she had achieved it all on her own terms. She no longer had to prove anything to anyone, not to her father, not to Oae, not even to herself. She had built something from nothing, and she had done it with grace and resilience. Ema and his sisters remained her constant support, and in them, she found the family she had always needed. They celebrated her victories, stood by her through challenges, and offered her a love that was genuine and unconditional. It was a kind of love that didn't come with expectations or strings attached. It was the kind of love that healed. Years later, Ain looked back on her journey, not with bitterness, but with a quiet pride. She knew that her past had been filled with hardship, but it had also given her the strength to become who she was today. She was no longer the scared, neglected child hiding in the shadows of her father's affection. She had outgrown that life, and in doing so, she had found a version of herself that was unshakable. When people asked her about her success, Ain would smile and simply say that it wasn't just about the business or the wealth. It was about the freedom to live life on her own terms, without the weight of the past dragging her down. It was about choosing love, kindness, and strength over anger and resentment. And while she never saw her father or sister again, she often thought about that final encounter. It wasn't the ending she had envisioned, but it was the one she needed. In letting go of them, she had let go of the part of herself that had been tied to their approval. She had allowed herself to be free, and that was the greatest victory of all. Ain's life continued to flourish. She and Ema built a family together, one filled with joy and the love she had once been denied. They raised their children with the same values that had helped Ain survive her darkest times: strength, kindness, and the belief that they were enough, just as they were. She never wanted them to feel the way she had growing up, and she made sure they knew every day that they were loved. As Ain grew older, she found herself reflecting less and less on her childhood. The memories were still there, but they no longer had the power to hurt her. Instead, they served as reminders of how far she had come, of the woman she had become despite everything. In the end, Ain's story wasn't about the pain her father and sister had caused her. It wasn't about their rejection or the years she spent trying to earn their love. It was about her ability to rise above it all, to find her own path, and to create a life filled with everything she had once thought was out of reach. Her story was one of resilience, of finding strength in the darkest places, and of ultimately choosing to live in the light. And that, she knew, was the most important lesson of all. She had learned that no matter where you come from or what you endure, the power to shape your own future is always in your hands. Ain had chosen to reclaim hers, and in doing so, she had discovered the true meaning of freedom.